So, poison gas is not something that you would want to be on the receiving end of. It is absolutely horrifying to see photographs of what any form of poison gas does to a person. I took a college class where we had to look at photos of poison gas, and it was horrifying. It sucked. While researching this episode, when I was looking at mustard gas and arsenic and all the other different things, the photos of that were horrifying. For this episode, those types of photographs will not be in this because one, I don't want to put that in there because I don't want to have to look at them, and two, I don't know if YouTube would allow me to have those in there. So, if you would like to look up any of the type of gases that I'm going to be talking about today and the injuries that they cause, feel free to do so on your own time. Because no. So, for this episode, we are going to say poison gas is a gas, liquid, or solid that releases vapors designed to kill, injure, or disable people through inhalation, skin contact, or ingestion. Okay, so it can be a solid block of something, and as long as it releases a vapor, and that vapor comes in contact with a person, and somehow with contact with that person they fall injured or dead, that's a poisonous gas, okay? The intent is something that we'll talk about later. But with that definition, we can look at something that kind of makes me a little ticked off when I think about it. So, when you think of poison gas, you probably think of some super green cloud rolling across, the battlefields of World War One. And that is true. Poison gas was used in World War One to one, great effect, and two, widespread effects as well. However, the problem that I have with it is people saying, or articles saying, the first time gas was used was at Ypres, because it really wasn't. Now, if you want to get hyper specific, then you can say that, but you can't just blanket say, like, first gas attack was April 22nd, 1950, and the Second Battle of Ypres, because it's not true. And we're going to look with this very fancy piece of paper, because always going to have the paper in the episodes now. People say the first gas attack is at Ypres, and it's not. That type of gas, yes. A gas agent being used in warfare, no. The first time gas would be used, supposedly, there's not a whole lot of evidence to back it up. The time to back it up, though, would be around 429 BC, would be 2000 BC, possibly in India. But who knows? It's not entirely certain. So it's definitely not the first time. And you can't say that's the first time that gas was used in a lethal manner, because gas was used lethally well before that. Again, going back to 2000 BC, 429 BC, China, you can say, the wars in Africa pre-World War One. It's definitely not the first time that gas was used in that kind of a lethal manner. So you can't say that. You also can't really say that, the Second Battle of Ypres is the first time that gas is used at scale, necessarily. In January of 1915, so a handful of months before the Second Battle of Ypres, you have 15,000 shells being launched that are filled with gas onto Russian positions. That is an incredibly large scale as well. So you can't really necessarily say that the scale was the first time seen either. The scale was larger than those 15,000 shells, but it's not like there was nothing heard of before Ypres either. So you can't really say scale. But if you were to say the first time that gas is used, so the first time lethal gas is used at that large of a scale with that intended purpose, then yes, it's the Second Battle of Ypres. But gas has been used for thousands of years, and we're going to look into that in today's episode. So, with this idea of anything that produces a vapor that comes in contact with people, poison gas can technically be just lighting a fire, and the intent of the smoke blowing on to the soldiers is, chemical warfare. I don't really like that idea, though. I think there has to be intent behind it, because if I light a fire and the fire blows off into my neighbor's yard, I'm not waging chemical warfare against my neighbors. It's just the smoke blew into their yard. But if I purposefully make something with the knowledge that what I'm making will have a higher than average, harmful content for that gas and then light it to purposely harm somebody, then I would count that as poison gas. And that's all debatable. That's just me. But I don't know. If you want to look at it that way, then you can say poison gas starts all the way in 2000 BC in India. Again, there's not a whole lot to back that up, though. The first time that we do know that poison gas was specifically used in warfare would be 429 BC. Now, this guy on the screen here, Thucydides, looked it up on YouTube. That is supposedly how it is pronounced. I couldn't tell you. They were just naming people whatever they felt like back then, I guess. But this guy writes about how when the Greeks were trying to take a city, they would mix pitch and sulfur together and then light the mixture, and the ensuing fire and smoke was so strong that the defenders on the walls of the fort had to evacuate their positions, meaning that the Greeks could take the position relatively unopposed. Now, pitch burns pretty well. Sulfur does add on to a burn. It does make the fire burn a little bit better, but it also has the effect of when burned, making the fumes much more toxic than just standard smoke. Now, you could say that when they added the sulfur and the pitch together, they were just intending to make the fire stronger. And the byproduct of the smoke that happened to be more toxic because of the sulfur is not chemical warfare. That just happened to be a byproduct. And there is a case to say that. But the deliberate act of adding in sulfur, which was known to be more noxious when burnt, to me at least, shows a deliberate act of chemical warfare. It is a gas attack in its own right, and it worked. It really did, and it's repeated multiple times. It's absolutely gas warfare. Is it to the scale? Is it documented as much as the Second Battle of Ypres? No, but should it absolutely count? Yes. And then if that doesn't work, if you don't want to take that because you are on the side that it's a byproduct and not necessarily just, its own gas attack, then we can look at the Chinese in 400 BC. They were known for pumping smoke deliberately into mining tunnels, not the fire, just the smoke. But what ended up happening is the Chinese were under siege in a city, and the enemy would make these tunnels under the city to try and pop up inside of the fort, or load it down with explosives and then blow the tunnel up, causing an explosive on the surface, and then they could take the fort. Well, the Chinese would figure out where these tunnels are, and the best way to make sure that that tunnel does not have anybody else in it is to completely destroy the tunnel, or make the tunnel untenable. Because if nobody can get inside of the tunnel without dying, that's just as effective as a tunnel not being there at all. So the Chinese would figure out where these tunnels were, and they would make a little hole all the way down, and then pump it full of smoke. That way they could gas the enemies out of there. But not only did they use gas from fires, they would mix the gas from the fire with other items that were known to be toxic, which would make the smoke even more toxic. So instead of having to take 5 breaths to die, you would take 4 breaths to die. That is absolutely chemical warfare. That is gas warfare at a small scale, undeniably small, but it should totally count. Now, here is a kind of debatable one, honestly. Greek fire in 600 AD burns on literally everything. Like, it was known to burn on wood, it was known to burn on the land, it was known to burn on the water. And nobody knows exactly how to recreate it, but Greek fire as a byproduct would have smoke that was more toxic than just, standard smoke from a fire. Now, again, going back to the argument of it was a byproduct and not necessarily designed to be a chemical weapon, the ingredients that they would mix with the Greek fire was known to be more toxic when burnt. So does the intent of them purposely putting that item into the mixture to make sure that the smoke is a little bit more toxic an act of chemical warfare, or is it just a byproduct of the burning in the act of that? Again, completely debatable, but I think that it should count at least a little bit. And Greek fire is used all the way until the early 1500s, somewhere in that range, because Da Vinci wrote about it. Da Vinci's also the one that wrote about making this aerosol powder that would be thrown on other ships nearby, which would then poison the enemy crew. He's also the one that in his own diary would talk about giving the soldiers of the boat that was throwing the arsenic onto the other boats protective masks that would cover their nose and mouth. That way they would not inhale the poison. And this would be the first time a gas mask would be mentioned in history. Just a little fun fact. Now, was that used? Not to our knowledge. But does that also count? Probably not. It's not necessarily a gas. It's more of like a, poisonous item. Like the same idea as like slipping poison into somebody's drink. Not a gas, but still poison. So, yeah. But a fun fact. Now, this next one, I read it in a book from an acclaimed author, but I could not find many other results on the internet, but that's also because the internet kind of sucks now. If you go and try and look anything up on the internet, it's like Grokpedia, which is some stupid AI thing. It's the AI, thing at the top. 3 results you've never heard of. A 5th result that's talking about like anti-vax for some reason. It's getting really hard to find stuff online now. But this book talked about the Mongols in 1000 AD that had these bombs that were little tiny bombs, about this size, and they were about 5 pounds. And when they would explode, the items that were inside of the bombs would release an aerosol that was poisonous to humans. It would irritate the person near it and then cause them to either be injured, incapacitated, or died. And again, I couldn't find a whole lot to back this up other than in that book that I read, but if true, that is absolutely chemical warfare. In World War I, you would have gas grenades as well. So what separates the Mongol gas grenades in 1000 AD from the German, French, or British gas grenades in 1915? Who knows? Now, the next thing is also around 1000 AD, and that would be the Chinese and the Germans using noxious gases and blowing them via the wind into battlefields. This isn't even, we have a fire at the bottom of the enemy's wall, and then the smoke from that fire is going to go up over the wall and cause the defenders to move away. This is straight up, we are going to build a fire with this ingredient in the fire to make the smoke more toxic, and then we're going to wait for the winds to blow in the right direction to light these fires, and then that smoke is going to blow into their ranks and cause them to be injured or die. And that is just straight gas warfare. That is chemical warfare at its finest. Almost 900 years before it would be talked about in World War II. Now, you also have stink bombs used by Germany in the 30 Years' War, which is in early 1600s going into the mid 1600s. These would be mixed with all these really nasty ingredients, like goat's hoofs would be in there, just really nasty stuff. And from what I saw, there wasn't a whole lot of use to those. Like, it wouldn't necessarily kill you, but it's still kind of fun that they had stink bombs. Now, a few years after the 30 Years' War, you have the first international treaty, which banned poison bullets and poison projectiles. Now, it does not ban gases yet, but this does set a precedent that, poison in a bullet or an arrow works. It has been used before, so we're going to stop that. And after this treaty, there is a significant gap in between, when they used it in the 30 Years' War to the next time they use it. I'm going to talk about that now. Now, starting in the late 1600s, going all the way to about 1850, there is this incredible drop in recorded uses of chemicals in war. Now, this is from the National Center for Health, and they have recorded all of these different accounts of when gas was used. And it's been super helpful in researching for this episode, and there's just this crazy gap from poison to no poison to back to poison. And this, massive gap is not because we haven't found any, uses. It's not like they just kept using it and we never found any evidence. It's because it was no longer a viable option. And that's for a handful of reasons. The first one is going to be a change in warfare. Now, back to the handy piece of paper. I'm really just using this any chance I get. Now I'm making up stuff to use it. If you are the X and you have the fire, And the fire is, mixed with arsenic. So that way the smoke is a little bit more noxious than usual. It kills people faster. And your enemy is sitting in their city over here. When the smoke blows to the city and the defenders of the city are, there is nowhere for them to go. So then they have to leave the city and then you can take the city. But then starting around 1600, warfare changes. Armies start meeting each other out in fields instead of, a siege and then the besieged. So now that they're in a field, you light your fire, the smoke starts flowing, but except by the time the smoke gets to the enemy in the field over here, the enemy's already moved over here. You have more fluidity in this environment. So now the smoke is not as effective. You can only really use smoke if the enemy is stationary. So poison gas sees a drop due to the change in warfare. Now, the next thing is that weapons have gotten much more reliable. The entirety of warfare and all of the technology changes from sticks to whatever crazy space gun that we're building now can be summed up in just a handful of words. And that is, how do I kill that guy more efficiently? That's all it is. And for the longest time, the most efficient way to kill somebody was not with gas anymore. You have cannons that in a few shots can take down a fort's walls. So instead of getting all the gas together, getting all the ingredients, waiting for the winds to blow a certain direction and then putting it onto that city, you can just wheel up a cannon, fire a handful of shots, and the wall has come down. And now your guys have rifles, so they can shoot the enemy before the enemy even gets near them. It is no longer viable to kill gas because it's not as efficient anymore. And efficiency is what you want when you're trying to kill somebody, apparently. Now, that's the second reason. The third reason is honor. Being so serious. You have, after the treaty, admirals and generals from all over the world talking about how it is ungentlemanly to use gas. There are talks about using gas in the Navy, because if you can successfully deploy a gas agent on another vessel's boat and it manages to get into the confines, the belly of the boat, there's nowhere for the sailors to go, and then it's super effective. And it's seen as cowardly, so they don't do it. You have this image on the screen here, which is from a Confederate private in World War I sending a letter to his command with an idea to make a gas shell. And this gas shell, when fired, will come down onto the Union soldiers and then spray gas everywhere and kill them. The Union did the same thing. You have Union soldiers and officers sending letters to Abraham Lincoln saying we should use gas. And they don't, for a couple of reasons. Going back to the movement idea, more fluidity. You have the sieges of Petersburg and Yorktown where they're not used because, one, don't want to be the guy that's super dishonorable and uses it, and two, if you use gas, you are opening Pandora's box. If you use gas on the Confederates will use gas back on you. And do you really want to start that? So gas is not used for a good long while. It's just not. In 1874, the International Convention comes out and it bans the use of poison weapons, and also poison gas. And this treaty is renewed in 1899 and it is renewed in 1907. Now, this treaty does literally nothing. The British use chemical warfare, arsenic and gas, against the Russians in the 1850s. And then in 1874, you had this international convention that bans the use of poison gas. And it should be done there, right? The International Convention says it, we're not going to use gas anymore. Except the British use gas against, the native Africans in the Boer War. The Russians and the Japanese use gas against each other in the Russo-Japanese War just before World War I to limited effect, but an effect. So now chemical warfare is getting back on its horse. It's coming back. Why is it coming back? Because we've gone back to a static change in warfare. Napoleon, you have soldiers in long lines. They are marching at each other. You can overrun cannons because the cannon takes forever to fire at you. But then the invention of the machine gun comes around, and now you are stuck in a trench. You are stuck in a defensive position. How do you take a defensive position? By dislodging the defenders. How are we going to do that? With gas. And it is because of the machine guns and the artillery and the rifles that have gotten accurate to extended ranges, and they're, fast firing, that static warfare comes back and sets the stage beautifully for poison gas in World War I. Now, you have the stage set for chemical warfare. These big gas attacks in World War I, because everybody's going to be bogged down. They're going to be staying in the same positions. You can get the gas ready. There's nowhere for them to run except away. And you think this is it. April 22nd, 1915, the Second Battle of Ypres, this has to be the gas attack. The first time it's used in World War I. Except it's still not. The French use these grenades on the screen here in August of 1914. We are talking days after World War I breaks out. And these grenades are filled with tear gas. Now, again, going back to the definition of what's a poison gas, it doesn't have to necessarily kill, just injure or incapacitate. Tear gas absolutely incapacitates people. That's its whole job, is to disperse them, incapacitate them. This is chemical warfare at a literal unit-to-unit scale, incredibly small scale, but it's absolutely there. The Germans also used tear gas in October of 1914 on the British, also to very little effect, and neither side considered this to be a violation of the treaty, because one, both sides used it, two, neither side was really harmed by it, and three, I guess they just didn't want to, duke it out. But still, that is a gas, a chemical being used, and that should totally count. And if that doesn't count for you, in January of 1915, it absolutely should. So, at the beginning of the episode, we had this whole big talk about, Ypres wasn't the first. It wasn't the first lethal. It wasn't, the first time that gas was used at large. This is the first time that gas is used on large, with a large purpose as well. In January of 1915, so months before Ypres, you have the Germans firing almost 20,000 gas shells at Russian positions. It is this massive, planned out offensive. On the screen here is a gas shell. In location A, it's the large part of the shell is where the liquid or the gas would be stored, and then it would explode, and the liquid and gas would be spread out, and then you would have your gas, in place doing its thing. And it doesn't work too well because the tear gas that is inside of these shells doesn't activate when it's under a certain temperature, and because they're in Russia in 1915, it's too cold, so the tear gas doesn't do anything. But the intent was there. They had this huge, massive offensive planned out with 20,000 shells. If that doesn't show large-scale gas attacks, I don't know what does. So if you really want to claim Ypres as the first gas attack, you would have to say something stupid along the lines of Ypres was the first time that, super lethal gas was used on purpose at a large scale and was effective. If you say all of that together, then yes, Ypres is the first. But just saying the Second Battle of Ypres is the first time poison gas is used in war just doesn't sit right. Now, this image on the screen here is Ypres. This is the Second Battle of Ypres, and these guys are setting up the gas canisters that would be, releasing the gas. Now, this is the first time that gas is launched from a cylinder like this. It is a pressurized cylinder. You open up the valve, it goes up through those tubes into no man's land, and then causes the smoke to be billowed out. Now, when the smoke was eventually put out, it was 4 miles wide and about 50 feet high, and it slowly moved into Allied lines. Now, there would also be several more gas attacks just during the Second Battle of Ypres alone, causing thousands and thousands of casualties. It opened up a 4-mile wide, opening because the French units that were right in the middle of this gas attack didn't have any protective measures. Because who's ready for a gas attack when gas hasn't been used this effectively and this widespread ever? Beforehand, it was small units. It was small coordinated attacks, but this is huge and it works really well. So they keep doing it. Now, this gas was chlorine gas. Chlorine gas is the type of gas that blinds you as soon as you come in contact with it. So that's why you see, the images of World War I where they have the bandages over their eyes and they're holding the person in front of them. That's chlorine gas. Now, in 1916, phosphine gas is first used. Phosphine gas is infinitely worse than chlorine gas is. Phosphine gas is colorless. You have chlorine gas, which is, it's brownish, it's like greenish color, and you can see it from forever away. But chlorine gas, until you get a whiff of it, you won't know it is coming. And by the time you have a whiff of it, you have almost no time to get your gas mask on. Phosphine gas is also 6 times as lethal as chlorine gas. So phosphine gas starts to be used a lot more than chlorine gas does later in the war because it is more effective than chlorine gas. Also, both sides would be using phosphine gas later in the war. Now, in 1917, you have an even more deadly type of gas. Now, this guy on the screen here is the most terrifying gas of World War I. This is mustard gas, and this is mustard gas's form when it's not in the big billowing cloud that you see rolling across the fields. Mustard gas is a kind of an motor oil consistency liquid, and the odors it produces is yellow, and it makes the cloud that then goes and harms people. But it's originally like a motor oil consistency, and it is terrifying. Chlorine gas, you see the green cloud in the distance, you put on your gas mask, you sit there, you wait it out, you should be fine. Mustard gas, you see the yellow cloud in the distance, you put your gas mask on, and you're not fine. Because mustard gas only has to touch you to kill you. Mustard gas will react with any part of exposed skin, and not a single nation throughout the war had a fully protective, way of protecting their soldiers from mustard gas. Because to protect yourself from mustard gas, you have to have an airtight, outfit. There can be no way for the gas to touch your skin. So the boots have to, be sealed to the pants, and the pants have to be sealed to the shirt, and the shirt has to be sealed to gloves, and there has to be a full over-the-head respirator that connects into the shirt. There can be no exposure to outside air at all, and that is horrifying. And even more horrifying is what it does to you. Even if it does not, get into your lungs, if it touches you, you get these absolutely nasty blisters. They are horrifying to look at. Not only that, you won't get them immediately, which is somehow even more terrifying. The onset of these blisters would happen hours after contact. Now, if you were being attacked by mustard gas and you didn't get your respirator on, you could still be able to see. This does not cause you to go blind immediately, but it will kill you in other ways. Now, if you manage to get to an aid station after exposure and you didn't breathe it in, your odds of dying are only around 5%. Pretty good odds if you don't have some crazy level of exposure. But mustard gas was the most effective gas of the war. This would cause more than 8 times the amount of casualties compared to other gases used. It is horrifying. And when you think of gas in World War I and you think of blind people, you're thinking of chlorine gas. When you think of the horrors that gas causes, you're probably thinking of mustard gas. And both sides would be using it, and it was just atrocious. Now, quick recap. Super large scale, purpose planned out, effective gas attack. The first one of that would be Ypres, April 22nd of 1915. The first time that gas is planned out on a wide scale, like a super large scale, would be in Russia in January of 1915. Was it effective? No. But was it planned? Was it tried? Yes. The first use of gas being used purposefully on an enemy position could be in 2000 BC, definitively 429 BC, or 400 BC with the Chinese in the mining tunnels. But if you go around saying the first time gas is used in warfare was April 22nd, 1915, it's just not correct. It's not. If you want to say the full title, be my guest, and that would be correct. But the more you know, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's kind of a long one, but I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye.